Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Northern Dynasty Minerals, and they have probably the largest undeveloped copper and gold deposit in the world. They're traded on the TSX for NDM, and they're on the New York Stock Exchange for NAK. So who are they? Northern Dynasty is a company looking to develop their Pebble Deposit located in Alaska. This deposit is considered one of the largest, if not the largest, undeveloped copper and gold project in the world. The deposit was discovered back in the 1980s by Trek. Northern Dynasty bought it back in 2002 when gold prices were extremely low. The stock was extremely hot from 2006 to 2012 on the gold bull run. Roughly $1 billion has been invested into developing this resource, and Northern Dynasty currently owns 100% interest in this project. So there's been a lot of controversy over this mine. This mine's kind of been the target of kind of radical green activists, people who, don't really want to see development and stuff like that. Their big argument is they believe that the mine will destroy Alaskan fishing, Alaskan salmon fishing, just because it's one of the kind of like the mountains that drains into that area where all like the fishing happens. To me, this is kind of like the similar outrage to like the XL pipeline. It's not necessarily the most logical. I think it's a lot more emotionally based. Like with the XL pipeline, it's like you're not doing anything to actually curb oil demand. You're basically just forcing the Canadian oil producers to ship by rail instead of ship by pipeline, and it's just like costs more. There's a lot more risk of the the train crash and stuff like that, and there being like an environmental disaster from that. So yeah, to me, it's the same kind of thing. It's like you look at the Pebble deposit, and it's a pretty barren landscape. It's not a lot of wildlife, not a lot of forestry going on there, and it's like I think that the area that they got is basically like a thousandth of like the water of the shed plains or whatever that actually flow into the Alaskan salmon, like the Bristol Bay. So to me, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of overblown. Another controversy that happened back in the fall is like there was some undercover footage of like the CEO, and they basically said that they believe that this project could go on for a lot longer than the projected or like the applied for mine life. And I even think that was actually in the mine plan that they applied for, because there's basically a section of it where you're basically like, hey, we believe that there's further deposits and further mine life to this, but we're only applying for a limited mine life. They also kind of ticked off. They said some rough things about the Alaskan Senators, basically saying that they're in opposition, but it's kind of just grandstanding, and that they wouldn't really fight it when it comes down to it. And then also the election of Biden was kind of like the last straw, and everybody assumed that this would basically completely kill the project off. Because I think back in August, Biden specifically said that he would cancel this project, but there's just not a lot of legal precedence for that. So let's go over the deposit size. Currently the company has basically 500 million shares outstanding, price around 75 cents, market cap around $375 million. This is all Canadian. So they have 107 million ounces of gold. This is basically like reserves and resources, and inferred all the resource totaled up. And so a Canadian gold prices of around $2,200 gold. It's about $235 million or $235 billion for the gold. Silver, it's only about $16 billion. Copper, that's the biggest piece of this actually. It's 80 billion pounds of copper at $5.50 per pound Canadian. Would be about $443 billion. We have some molybdenum, which is $82 billion. We have rhenium, I believe, $7 billion, and then palladium at $11 billion. They also have $42 million in cash currently. And so if I was adding up the total deposit, it is roughly $800 billion Canadian is what the total deposit size is. Yeah, not exactly sure how I did the number there. Okay. So what I believe is that we're headed into a commodity super cycle. There hasn't been enough capital invested into new mines in production. A lot of the mines that we're living off of were kind of like discovered back in like the 40s or 50s, 60s, developed kind of in the 70s, 80s, maybe even the 90s. and we just kind of been living off the fat of that previous development and stuff like that. But what's starting to happen is that the grades are declining on a lot of these mines, and it's just there hasn't been a lot of new mines put into production, particularly with the low commodity prices over the last 10 years. So it's like kind of like I feel like we're in a time where our priorities are kind of mixed up, that we're like over speculating on companies like Tesla and then like things like Bitcoin, that don't really do anything. Like it's like the idea that Tesla should be $1 trillion company is like they're a car manufacturer, and it's like they have some intermediate quality issues, and it's like they're just not selling that many cars compared to like any of the other car retailers. And it's like, why are they valued at like 10, 20 times as much as like Ford or something like that? But it's like what's actually going to be needed to keep making these cars, that's where I think that it's truly undervalued, and that these prices are going to have to rise dramatically in order to spur on new production. Like to build a new copper mine, you're looking at usually a $2.5 to $10 billion expenditure for that, and it's like it takes a while. Like these mines are massive, and like it might take 3 to 5 years to actually build this mine. And so it's like for a lot of these copper producers, I have a feeling that they need about 6, 7, maybe even $8 per pound U.S. copper for actually them to be like, okay, like let's actually like go ahead and develop a new project or something like that. So it's like I believe that like all of these commodities, like it's not just copper, but it's like zinc and iron ore and nickel and all these kind of things. It's like they're going to have to see significantly higher prices to see new mine development. Um, so yeah, it's like that's kind of like I think there's going to be a shift that real things are becoming more expensive and financial assets are going to lose their value in comparison. So I don't think that necessarily Northern Dynasty should just be a buy and hold. I think that trading Northern Dynasty probably makes the most sense. Um, the low end of the trading range to me seems to be below 70 cents Canadian. It's like if you can buy it 65 cents. I bought a fair bit of it back when it was like 40, 41 cents at the end of December. And then it had bought some more at like 65 cents. It's an extremely volatile stock. Um, so I think that it's definitely something to play. And then probably selling off, maybe not all your position, because I do think this has got true intrinsic value. But once it gets to $1, $2, $3, $4, it's like at least you got to sell off all your like your initial capital invested. So let's say you put $10,000 in and it's risen to be a $20,000 or $30,000 valuation, just based on your stock or whatever. It's like at least get your $10,000 out of the stock. So you're trading on like the host money, because this stock has definitely had a tendency to destroy shareholder wealth, but it's very volatile. So it's like if you kind of see what you're doing, I think you kind of have a plan in mind ahead of time, you can play it quite well. But if you don't, it can definitely run you over. Currently, it's on the lower end of the trading range. It's been trading in like the high 60s, low 70s. So right now, what we're kind of waiting on is that they applied for an appeal to the Army Corps of Engineers. Basically, what they kind of like they back in August or whatever, they gave it kind of like an approval saying that like it looks like everything's good to go. But then come, I believe it was like the beginning of December, end of November after the election, it's basically like, yeah, you don't meet the standards. And they didn't really elaborate on it, and it just seemed very politically based because this was just after the election. So with some good news, like it had good news because it really got put down the dumpster in end of December. But then the Alaskan governor came out and said that he was in support of it, and I think they'd fight the federal government over it, and that really gave it a boost. And then they also kind of announced that they're going to be appealing the decision, and so the stock went on a tear from like 41 cents to like $1.40. It was what I got some of my stock sold at the top. So yeah, it's a very volatile stock, and I think that'll continue to be both volatile to the upside and to the downside. Personally, I think it'll take about 10 to 20 years before it actually becomes a mine, and it could be even longer than that. But I actually look at that as benefit, is that a lot of these companies are mining whatever commodity that they're mining right now. And I think that they're getting a significantly lower price than they could 5, 10, 15 years down the road. So it's like actually keeping that those minerals in the ground. I think it actually increases the value as it goes over time. Um, just because you're able to buy it so cheap, and the leverage that you're going to get on that could just be phenomenal. And I think the worst case scenario for this stock is that a large producer like Barrick or Freeport buys it for 500 million and just puts it on the shelf. And it's just like, oh, we'll just put this in the back shelf on our reserve list. And maybe if the copper price goes up to $10 an ounce or $10 a pound or whatever, that people might be more open to developing it at that time. So downside, company is extremely good at burning money. It appears to be that they're burning about $63 million a year. That was just like what they spent in 2020, and it was roughly the same what they spent in 2019. So I just kind of assume that that's probably what it's going to be going forward. They're facing class action lawsuit by shareholders. A lot of shareholders have just been kind of frustrated with the whole situation, and then kind of was the last straw with that whole hit piece that came about the undercover footage. They fought in the EPA before, and they won that court case, which was pretty impressive, but it's not a cheap process. And now they're going to be having to fight the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Again, probably not a fun prospect. Trump was relatively neutral in the project, whereas Biden has like come out directly and said like, we're not going to let this happen. So that's going to be another issue. A lot of investors have been burned by this stock and don't want anything to do with it. And I think these are all reasons why it's so cheap. And it can also move fast. So yeah, basically just what I said before, went from 40 cents to $1.40. I can see that definitely happening again very easily. But on the flip side, it can go down just as much, just as fast. Comparison company is Nova Gold. They have a similar deposit in Alaska. It's called the Donlin deposit. They have $114 million in cash. Don't know if that's Canadian or American. They didn't specify. The deposit is about 44 million ounces total, 39 million of measured and indicated, and then 6 million ounces of inferred. They have 50% ownership of this, and Barrick Gold owning 50%. The share price is $11.48. Market cap of $3 billion roughly. So when we're looking at their valuation, they're basically priced at about $168.37 per ounce of gold in the ground, and Northern Dynasty is $3.50 per ounce in the ground. And Northern Dynasty also has the copper, and they have kind of like the lithium, the silver, the palladium, all that kind of stuff. Whereas with Nova Gold, I couldn't see if they have any credits. Like I tried to find if they had any copper or nickel, anything like that. I couldn't find anything. I'm not sure. So in summary, I think it's a world-class deposit that can be purchased for pennies on the dollar. Eventually, it'll have to become a mine, but this could be 50 to 100 years from now. It's just like we're not going to be finding more and more like world-class resources. So it's like it's just going to have to be that pushed through, regardless of what happens to it. But yeah, it's like you can't just have this shit sit on the shelf forever, but it can sit on the shelf a lot longer than most people expect. This stock will be extremely volatile, both the upside and downside. It burns cash like there's no tomorrow, and they definitely have a lot of haters. So definitely things to watch out for. But this deep valuation prospect, generally I prefer cash flowing assets that are paying for themselves, especially with like the gold companies and the platinum group metals companies being so cheap right now. But I think this one has enough value to warrant its consideration. And it's like, if you get a chance to take your initial capital off the table, definitely do it. I was able to with Northern Dynasty. It's like I was basically able to take a Katusa free ride on it. And now I've just got free shares of it. So it hasn't been fun to watch it go from $1.10 to 70 cents, but I've already basically locked in my cost structure for that. So I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting company that you should definitely keep your eyes out on for. Thanks for watching.